Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for Women's Inequality in a Post-Roe World, an important discussion about how companies are realigning their business and people strategies around reproductive rights and women's health in the wake of the controversial Supreme Court ruling and current shakeup of abortion rights around the country. My name is Kristen Brown. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and I'll be your moderator for today's conversation. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our special guests, starting with Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, representing California's 18th Congressional District since 1992. We also have with us Gaby Santana Goldstein, Head of Business at HeyJane, where she focuses on business development and partnerships, new growth opportunities, fundraising efforts, and legal and policy work. Also joining us today is Sara El-Amine, Head of Public Engagement at Lyft, where she oversees driver, passenger, and local nonprofit engagement. Ladies, thank you all so much for being here with us today. Before we get into our conversation, I'd like to give you each a few moments to further introduce yourselves. Let's go ahead and start with you, Congresswoman Eshoo.
Well, Kristen, thank you to you for moderating, to everyone with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. The operational word being leadership, because leadership is being exhibited once again today. I'm so proud to have worked with the SVLG for decades now, and much has been accomplished. But today's discussion is an enormous new challenge that's been set before everyone in the country. On a constitutional right that has been taken away for the first time in the history of our country. So I look forward to being with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman. Let's go now to Sara.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and Representative Eshoo and Gaby. Thank you for all that you do in the world. As Kristen mentioned, my name is Sara El-Amine, and I am Head of Public Engagement at Lyft. I'm grateful to be with this group this morning, despite the upsetting recent Supreme Court decision that brings us together on this crucial issue. I am one of the people who develops and implements our social policies and stances as a corporation. In this instance, I am also an impacted community. Several months ago, during my tenure as an executive at Lyft, I had a miscarriage and needed an elective abortion. The month-long process of removing a much-wanted baby from my body was one of the most emotionally and physically grueling things I have been through, period. I consider myself mentally strong, and I'm definitely a well-resourced and privileged person. And still, I can't imagine being able to handle any more stress, logistics, or government-imposed limitations around that moment. It already nearly broke me. Broadly, I believe, and Lyft does too, that those who have not experienced things should not get to make the rules about them. That goes for this issue and a whole slate of additional social and economic stances and policies. It's why we need women, people of color, and socioeconomic diversity in leadership positions in elected office, in corporate boardrooms, and on executive leadership teams, and in advocacy group leadership alike. So at Lyft, we've been public and uncompromising about saying that access to healthcare and abortion, specifically using that word, is essential, and transportation should never be a barrier to that access. We've long been committed to protecting women's rights to access healthcare through the Lyft platform. When we saw the precursor to this attack on women's rights in Texas last year during SB 8, we took a bold step to create a driver legal defense fund to cover 100% of legal fees for our drivers sued under SB 8 while driving on our platform. We also donated $1 million to Planned Parenthood, just to make it clear where we stood. We're building on the steps that we've already taken in Texas and now Oklahoma by extending our legal defense fund to other states as they pass similar laws. And we're also partnering with Planned Parenthood to pilot the Women's Transportation Access Program, a Safe States program that help women seeking out-of-state care with transportation costs to and from airports and clinics. So people deserve to get where they need to go without monitoring or punishment, including, and honestly, especially if that place is an abortion clinic. And I'm really grateful to all of you for the work you do to that end.
Thank you so much. Gaby, let's go now to you.
Thank you both so very much. Thrilled to be on this panel in such wonderful company. And Sara, thank you for sharing that deeply personal story. I know that at HeyJane, we know how impactful sharing patient stories are. And while it's really difficult, it is also really encouraging to see how many people are becoming more comfortable coming out and sharing and normalizing the experience. So thank you very much for that. As Kristen mentioned, I'm Gaby Santana Goldstein. I'm the head of business at HeyJane. We are a telemedicine, we're a startup. So I do a lot of things from business development, partnerships, legal policy work. And for those of you who aren't familiar, HeyJane is a virtual clinic. So we provide telemedicine abortion care. We've been doing so since 2021. So we're rather new, but have grown really quickly. And we're really proud to say that we've been putting the power back in people's hands by providing care that's private, safe, affordable, accessible, supportive, and convenient for less than half the average price of an in-clinic medication abortion treatment. We not only prescribe abortion pills for people seeking treatment, which is ultimately the reason you want to come to us, but our clinical care team is also available by text, phone call, video chat for medical and emotional support, which I think Sara's story definitely demonstrates why providing both medical and emotional support is incredibly important, especially in this time. HeyJane patients are also able to access the first of its kind private peer-to-peer support forum. It's a really wonderful supportive space that's there just for our patients, and you're able to share stories and seek support before, during, and after treatment. We're live in 7 states as of this week: New York, California, Washington, New Mexico, Colorado, Illinois, and New Jersey. And I just really look forward to this conversation and talking about what this post-Roe world will look like, at least in the imminent future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So let's go ahead and get started with our discussion today. Congresswoman Eshoo, I'd like to begin with you. If you could help us to set the stage. At a high level, what does this recent Supreme Court ruling mean for women's reproductive rights in the United States?
Well, it came from the highest level because it came from the highest court. And the Dobbs case, what it means is what the court did, the highest court in the land, was to strike down what was constitutional for almost 50 years. And it was based on the right of privacy. So this has, what's happened since then? We all know what earthquakes are in California. If there was a reported earthquake at 9.8, we would say that that's utter devastation. What this has done is to cause total chaos and confusion across the country. So when the court struck down Roe, it sent the decision to the states. Many states had already adopted legislation, passed legislation called trigger laws, that if Roe was struck down, that their state law would automatically go into place. So that is the case with nearly half of the states. Nearly half the states had laws already in place. Some of those states are now adding even more draconian language to pass. I just left the floor of the House a short while ago to come back to the office to be with you. And we passed 2 bills. One of them deals with women that live in such states, Texas being one of them. And the Texas member of Congress, Lizzie Fletcher, that wrote the legislation that will allow women to leave their states safely and not be arrested because they're leaving their state for reproductive health care in another state because it's not available in their home state. And maybe some of your Lyft drivers are the ones that are going to be driving these women. So and the other was to once again codify Roe. So at the highest level has everything to do with the ground level, because these words, these decisions, just as my vote can walk into people's lives, this decision of the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, has brought this about, where daughters woke up in the morning and understood that they didn't have the same rights that their mothers have had over the last 50 years. So this is causing not only chaos and confusion, but women in crisis all over the country because of the states that they live in, the laws that are in place now, the draconian laws that are being anticipated in other states, and what happens to women. My daughter for years said, "Why do you keep talking about this? Why do you keep talking about what needs to be protected?" Because what we have in place is not forever. And there are many that thought that this would never be upended, that a constitutional right would not be ripped away, because it's the first time in the history of our country, it's a jaw dropper, that a constitutional right has been taken away. And of course, there are other communities of interest, certainly in the LGBTQ community, that are legitimately concerned, because the right to marry whomever you wish to marry is grounded or set on the right of privacy. Contraception is up for grabs. These are all things that we thought we would never revisit, but they are there. And when you say at the highest level, what does this mean? It means something to every family and every individual in the country, most frankly.
Absolutely. I agree. Thank you so much for setting the stage for us in that way.
What I should add too, Kristen, is that many of these laws in the states, it sounds so tidy for the court to say, or for anyone to say, give the states rights. Well, there are some really dark pictures, and many of the laws in these states don't even have any exceptions for rape and incest. Most famously, the story just this last week of a child just turning 10 years old that was raped. And now the government is saying that that child is forced to have that child. This is what's happened in our beautiful country. So we are going to fight to this and do every single thing in terms of data protection. And there are so many areas that we need to address legislatively on behalf of women in their lives. But this is, make no mistake about it, this is to control women. It will have an impact on every phase of a female's life, economic, in every way, I can't believe that at this stage in my life and in my legislative life that this is taking place. And I do think that companies throughout the Valley really need to start examining very, very carefully what their policies are going to be. And for those that collect data, they really need to rethink data that is collected, how it's kept, is it being sold, and how will it impact women, and I believe their right to privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And that's actually a great segue for our next question. So I'm going to turn to Sara. You know, we've been seeing businesses, including Lyft and a number of other SVLG members, who are committing to ensuring that women employees have access to reproductive health care, even if they live in a state that has banned abortions, as the Congresswoman just mentioned. What else do you think businesses can or should be doing to safeguard the health of their women employees?
Yeah, thanks so much for this question. And I couldn't agree more that businesses have unfortunately, frankly, because of the state of our democracy, a larger part to play than frankly we should in normatively setting the frameworks for policy, and then also role modeling what states should be doing to some extent. So the first thing I'll say is I think taking a public and immediate unequivocal stance really matters. The fact that leadership, whether leadership identifies women or not, particularly when they don't, come out and say, this is healthcare access. This is something that we stand behind as a company. We will ensure you have privacy, a right to access, and the ability to seek transportation to go where you need to make sure that you can access abortion is crucially important. But also, I think it's really important that we use the word abortion in corporations, and that we classify it as healthcare and talk about it as healthcare inside the hallways of power in a lot of these Silicon Valley and alike companies. The second thing I'll say that's more technical and maybe obvious, maybe not, is that we immediately and many other sort of allied companies did ensured that our healthcare benefits included coverage for elective abortion, as well as coverage if a treatment seeker needed to travel more than 100 miles from an in-network provider for abortion care. As the Congresswoman said, there are intense privacy implications. So part of the reason that we also donated funds to Planned Parenthood was that we wanted our employees, our customers, our riders, our drivers to know that there are clinics across this country, particularly in these sort of safe states of California and a few other bluer places, where you can go still get an abortion and women's healthcare outside of the confines of your company and your company, database and healthcare, because I think that's quite important as well. We also have a fully flexible workplace, which means that almost all team members have the choice where to live. But for companies with policies like that, they can evaluate their ability to offer women the option to relocate to a state where they're afforded more rights. And I've seen, I think, Salesforce and potentially a couple other places, companies do that. Last thing I'll say that's an important part of creating a culture within which abortion care is viewed as the healthcare for women that it is we have also really made an effort to have inclusion circles, a generous mental health benefits package, which includes therapy and coaching. I certainly used that when I was going through my unviable pregnancy and abortion. And it really helped me process the news and, how it affected me as a worker, as a leader, as a human, as a mother, in all the ways. So thanks for that great question.
Absolutely. Thank you. Gaby, I want to go to you now. HeyJane, as you mentioned, is part of FemTech, this new market of companies that are focused on women's reproductive health care. So can you tell us a little bit more about your company and how this ruling may impact your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we are a virtual clinic. So we have a team of clinicians, doctors, nurses, medical assistants who are all here to provide really complete care in terms of your abortion treatment itself. We're live in 7 states, all these protected states that have come out and been very vocal about protecting access to abortion, both to patients who live in those states, as well as patients who are now being forced to travel. So I think Congressman Eshoo painted a really comprehensive picture of what the future will look like. So in short, right, we have 26 states who are going to ban or in some way greatly limit access to abortion care over the next month. A number went into effect right after the ruling, and others have, other triggers that they're sort of waiting for. I will agree with Congressman Eshoo that the opposition or the antis have painted a very clean picture about, there's still half the country that has access to care. This decision impacts everyone. Pre-Roe, in-person clinics in these quote unquote safe states had already been reporting kind of capacity issues, really, really long clinic wait times, 2-3 weeks at a time. We've heard from some of our patients. And when you're talking about abortion care, time is of the essence. This is not a treatment where you can necessarily wait. The longer you wait, potentially the more expensive or complicated it becomes. And it could be illegal at that point. So there are very real consequences to having to wait. So what we have is a system where people in protected states, so I'm in Massachusetts, a very protected state, are still having tremendous barriers to access that care. And now we will have over half the states forcing its residents to travel and flood those safe states to access care in the first place. So it's a strained healthcare system that's going to be even more strained. We see the role of HeyJane and telemedicine providers as being able to really lessen the strain on kind of this ecosystem and in-person clinics. And we do so in a couple of ways. So the first is we're able to dramatically reduce the time and distance traveled for a patient. I don't want to downplay the travel burdens that patients are having to overcome. If you're lucky enough to be right over the border, that's great, but some patients are going to have to travel across 5-6 state lines to get into an eligible state. However, if you're working with HeyJane, that does mean crossing over the border. And if you're able to access a PO box, we can ship to hotels really anywhere. You can at least pick up those pills and go home rather than having to travel a lot more time to seek a clinic. The second is we have a completely asynchronous model. So what that means is you don't have to wait for an appointment time. You're guaranteed provider consults within 24 hours. And as I mentioned, this wait time is critically important to accessing just timely and safe abortion care. So we're able to take on a lot of that additional capacity and work hopefully in tandem with in-person clinics. So for us, we will remain available to patients, compliant in 7 states and growing, and just hopefully being a really good partner to everybody else who's been doing this for a very, very long time.
Yes, thank you so much. Just from what I've heard so far today, all 3 of you ladies are doing such important work. And Gaby, you had mentioned about the difference between safe states and states where people are going to have to travel to a safe state to get their care. And so I'd want to come back to you, Congresswoman Eshoo. What impact do you think Governor Newsom's commitment to uphold abortion rights in California will have, both here in California and for women in other states?
Well, thanks for asking about that. A bravo to the governor, because he recently signed a law to shield California abortion providers from out-of-state abortion bans. And he did an executive order to prevent any private health information from being shared in response to inquiries by other states. Very importantly, Californians will have on the ballot in November, coming up in a handful of months, an amendment to the state's constitution. And that Proposition 1, will codify access to abortion and to contraceptives. So I think that is going to be very important, obviously, to voters. It will, I think, motivate people to actually go out and vote, because it's really been so far a quiet election season in California. The governor also signed, he signed next year's budget, and included in that, very importantly, is about $250 million, $250 million for relative to abortion and reproductive health care, including money to cover the cost of abortions for low-income women. We haven't talked, I mean, it's, the impact, first of all, the entire fallout from the court's decision is jaw-dropping. but the burden of it falls very, very heavily on low-income women, women of color, Native Americans, Hispanic women, African American women, low income. So that is, when we talk, we have, all of my legislative and adult life, I've worked for the equality of women. This is a major, major setback. Make no mistake about it. So these funds, an amendment to the state constitution, these are all very important steps, very important steps. But when we get into the weeds of each one of these steps, it is yet another manifestation of what happens when a right is taken away from the American people. So we have major battle here, and so many constituents are saying, "What can I do? What can I do?" You can vote. You can vote. You can vote. We know, and this has become very partisan. But there aren't any votes sorrowfully on the other side of the aisle. If you heard the debate today, your hair would have fallen out of your head. These are people that don't believe in contraception. They don't believe in contraception. And Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas, in his concurrence, wrote very clearly that the other rights that rest with privacy that we enjoy, contraception being one of them, marriage equality, that all of those should be taken up by the court as well. So it's going to really be up to the American people. If there is not really a big turnout in November, to essentially really be protecting our democracy. If the court sees that people don't care, that there wasn't a response to this, they're going to keep marching on, because they have already really disregarded the sentiment of the American people on Roe. 70, 80% approval of that. So, Governor Newsom, bravo. I was one of the members that met with him. The California delegation met with him this morning in the Capitol. And, we walked through many of the California issues that we certainly look after here, but thanked him for what he's doing at home, because women are really depending on that, and that California is poised to be a state that will welcome others that have to flee their own homes in their own states for reproductive health care. I think I need to leave you all, though. It's 3:15 for me, and I need to get to the airport so I can get home tonight. Is it all right if is it okay if I leave you now?
We completely understand, Representative Eshoo. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. We really need to get the message out to the companies and California businesses, and most especially Silicon Valley, because across the country and around the world, when they talk about news, when they make news, or zero in on businesses, inevitably they come straight to California and straight to Silicon Valley. Our businesses there really need to lead the way. So I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you to the brave, great ladies that are a part of this, and everyone that tuned in. And you know that you have a partner that you can rely on in me. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
So Sarah and Gabby, if we could continue these discussions, it's such an important conversation. And Sarah, I'm wondering what you're hearing in your work with engagement, right? What you're hearing from your employees, your drivers, and your customers about the Supreme Court ruling and the other abortion restrictions that are happening and how it's impacting them.
Yeah, you know, it's fascinating. I do want to spend a second talking about this from a business, just like protection perspective for a moment. Many of these laws, SB 8 in Texas and then SB 1503 in Oklahoma, are starting to come directly at businesses. They're starting to come at businesses by expanding the liability sort of locus, so that in SB 8 and then in SB 1503, rideshare drivers who didn't even know who they were driving where could end up being liable in murder for giving someone a ride to an abortion clinic. This is ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous from a values perspective, sure, and we should all speak to that. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous from a business perspective. It's not acceptable for, you know, members of Congress, members of state houses and senates to be restricting basic rights to privacy, basic rights to transportation, accessibility, healthcare access, and putting more liability on companies. So I think you're going to see more and more of that as these draconian and state-specific laws try to get sort of trickier and trickier and mesh lots of different key stakeholders in things. So we have a responsibility, I think, as business owners to protect our businesses in that way. So that's the first thing I want to say, which I don't feel like we acknowledge enough of. The second is we actually started hearing from our customers, our riders, our drivers, way before the Roe v. Wade ruling. So when Texas SB 8 passed in the summer of 2021, as I said, it came after our industry directly. There's a New York Times article that dropped the day after its passage and said, your Uber or Lyft driver could be sued for driving you to an abortion appointment. And our drivers, understandably so, started really sort of freaking out. And so we just were immediately clear. We said drivers are never responsible for monitoring where their riders go or why. And I really put myself in their shoes and also in my shoes as an impacted person who, you know, did take a Lyft to a healthcare appointment. Imagine being a driver and not knowing if you're breaking the law by giving somebody a ride. It's not compatible with business, actually. Similarly, riders should never have to justify or even share where they're going and why. Also, not compatible with business. Imagine being a pregnant woman trying to get to a healthcare appointment and not knowing if your driver is going to cancel on you for fear of breaking a law. What? So just laws like these are incompatible with people's basic rights to privacy. A lot of our company's community guidelines, the spirit for us of rideshare, and frankly, as I said at the beginning, the values, our values as a company. So, you know, broadly, we know that our drivers and riders largely agree with us that transportation should never be a barrier to a woman's right to access healthcare. And, you know, our commitments to protect that access have been met with real overwhelming support. I do want to say one thing about choice, which is coming up in the chat a little bit more. I encourage people to keep chatting about it. And many of us don't have a choice in the matter. If you have an ectopic pregnancy, you can die or you can get an abortion, basically. So there's lots of conversations, and I'm sort of taking off my official Lyft hat when I have that one. But I do think there's a false binary in saying that a lot of us have choices. If you're a 10-year-old who's a victim of incest, if you're you know, choice is important. And there are some people who have abortions because they're in charge of their own bodies. And I think this conversation has gotten so far off the rails of very logical, sort of clean choices that we need to call it what it is. It's forced birth. It's restricting access to basic healthcare for women, for 50% of our population. It's not okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. Gaby, so we're hearing from Sara about what Lyft is experiencing. What do you see as kind of the trends that would be emerging in femtech in this kind of post-Roe reality?
Sure. Some of the kind of immediate trends we've seen is definitely just more femtech companies coming out, even within our world, coming out and being really vocal and using the word abortion, as Sara said. I think there has been some hesitancy there in the past, and people are feeling as though they can finally come out and be very vocal about this, which I think is just terrific. There are a number of femtech companies who have started offering or really widening access to emergency contraception, for example. We've seen tremendous spikes in demand when it comes for that, people even stocking up, just knowing that getting access to care, generally speaking, is likely going to be incredibly difficult. We've seen, Congressman, as she mentioned, this is likely a bigger fight. So the same folks that are restricting access or banning access to abortion have clearly come out and said that they don't. This could mean the same for contraception. There are implications for IVF and fertility. And so I think we're seeing a lot more kind of like banding together, just because this issue will affect a number of areas, I think, in the femtech space and maternal health space, reproductive health journey space. So there's been that. I think for HeyJane in particular, some of the trends we've seen, which has been really interesting. So Sara mentioned companies covering this for their employees. So we've seen more employers coming to us, just talking about how important this is, and how do they integrate a service like this holistically for their employees. We've had, private commercial payer plans approaching us, just talking about wanting to expand coverage for the employers they represent and their members, which I, again, think is like just simply fantastic. This should be absolutely normalized and covered just like any other essential healthcare service. So those are some of the major trends we've been seeing.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So I want to go now to some questions that we are receiving in the chat box. I've got some people sending me questions. I'd like to encourage those who are joining us today, if you have any questions, go ahead and continue to put them in the chat box. One that I want to share with you is a question that was sent to me about how do we encourage companies to support health benefits that include abortion care when these companies have a large presence in the states that have banned abortion? How do you make the case for that within a company? Do either of you have any thoughts on that?
I have two quick thoughts. I bet Gaby has really good ones, because I think HeyJane maybe addresses some of these challenges. In the corporate policy that we built pretty immediately, actually ahead of the Roe v. Wade ruling, because we all knew it might be coming, I think, as I mentioned earlier, really specifically laid out travel stipends and travel options for staff who might live in states where abortion is banned, so that we would, as a company, be able to cover their costs under separate cover. I think that's quite important. And then I do think this flexible workplace thing is really meaningful. I think not everyone can move to a different state. There's tremendous privilege in that idea in and of itself. And for large national corporations that are based in many states, offering to pay for moving costs is a really meaningful gesture, I think. And I don't know, if I were one of the many Californians who'd moved to Austin or Phoenix or somewhere else during the pandemic, I certainly would be rethinking that big decision. So yeah, I think those are two pretty crucial ways to pitch in.
Yeah. Just so I understand the question, is the question around pitching this to leadership or how employees can do it? I mean, I think everything I've been told is, if employees are speaking up about it, that is the biggest reason for a company to pay attention to this. Sara can probably speak more to that. But I would say, I'm at HeyJane now. I've been at big tech companies. I was at Facebook and Wayfair and others. I found my ERGs in those companies to be incredibly powerful. Like, make this a central topic of conversation. Make the case for why this is important for people, and come up with proposals. I think travel stipends are really important. I think being able to access, also tap into funds in some sort of anonymized way is really important. Some people may not necessarily feel comfortable like telling their employer this is what they're doing. I would hope that's changing, but that's the reality. And so having a way for people to access funds in a way that they feel comfortable, I think is tremendously important. Providing obviously time off. This is a medical experience. For at-home treatment, we do hear a lot of our own patients say the reason they chose us and chose to stay at home is because they didn't have to take time off of work, and they chose to do it in off hours in the middle of the night, or they didn't have to get childcare, which is all, I think, for an employer, I would think is kind of music to their ears. And so just make it as easy and accessible as possible, particularly if you have employees in a banned state. This will impact your workforce tremendously. I mean, there's no question. You're talking about people taking a ton of time off, possibly losing their role for whatever reason. And so addressing it head on and letting employees know that you care no matter what political affiliation they come from. So that's another thing. It's not as though only people who vote for abortion access get abortions. We, in terms of how we treat our patients, don't bring a lot of that into play. We want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable getting care, no matter their political affiliation, religious affiliation. And so don't be fooled into thinking, just because you're in a highly conservative area, that this wouldn't impact your workforce, because it definitely will.
I just have one quick thing to add. Everything Gaby said is totally right on. I also think increasingly related to Gaby's point about showing staff sentiment, increasingly these high value staff that many of us in Silicon Valley are fighting over are really examining and interrogating the values and the benefits of their companies. And so in order to just remain competitive in a very basic way, I think that these type of offerings are going to become a part of the baseline, in the same way that parental leave over the past few years has become part of the normative framework that is just expected in Silicon Valley. So to me, in terms of pitching to leadership, there's just like, to a certain extent, screw the values case. It doesn't really matter to me where you live on the values, although, it does reflect or affect my desire to be at a company. There's a real business case here. There's an ROI, there's a cost to not providing these benefits, to not taking these stances. And whether it's staff recruitment and retention, whether it's staff healthcare and well-being, recruitment and rehiring are incredibly expensive. And I think it's also, you're seeing increasingly customers now picking companies that align with their values. And we're certainly seeing that as part of our continued competitive edge against our competitors in cities across the country. So it pays off.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was another question here that I think would be interesting to get both of your opinion on. And it was, how does one address differing opinions or lack of support in the office environment? Is that something that either of you have experienced, or have any advice for someone who may be experiencing that?
You can go ahead, and then I'll chime in on past experience. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, we have community guidelines, which I think are quite important for every company to set and abide by. And as part of our community guidelines, we are quite clear that we uplift others, we accept differences, and each staffer doesn't need to think or believe the same in order to be, safe at our company. So that protects people from slander, from discrimination, from bias. And on the other side of things, as we all know, there's some forms of some types of opinions, racism, sexism, so on and so forth, that harm other people's access to those same community guidelines. So we've been quite clear as a company that these are our community guidelines. This is where we stand. You are, as an individual, absolutely encouraged to take whatever, position, stance, to vote whatever way you'd like. And at Lyft, we believe that abortion is healthcare.
I completely agree. Like I said, I've been kind of part of organizations, big and small. Obviously, one right now where we're extraordinarily vocal, and that's perfectly great. Have been disappointed to see some news about, rumblings of silencing people who want to talk about this at their organizations. I mean, I think it totally depends on your culture, but if you're a company that claims to, ask employees to kind of give their personal selves over and open safe spaces, this is another topic of conversation that should actually absolutely be allowed in the workforce. And like I said, this is healthcare. So why is this any different from talking about coverage for fertility or parental leave or really anything else? It shouldn't be. And I think doing it in a respectful manner is absolutely always key, but with the right leadership in place, the right, just kind of demonstrating it with your own kind of how you speak about it in your own rhetoric, I think that's absolutely possible. I've been in many rooms with people who disagree with me, have completely different stances, and we can do so in a respectful manner, and at least get to a place of understanding. So I think it's really important if we're going to move this movement and conversation forward. I think further divisions are not helpful. It's sad to see kind of where we are, but we're really going to have to all come to places of understanding if we want to move more people with us. And then somebody in the chat did pose a question that I did want to address about possibly kind of creating these two worlds if we're talking about employers that cover these benefits for people who are lucky enough to work at these companies and those who don't. I think yes and no. I mean, there's some companies that have, of course, kind of Silicon Valley corporate execs, but also have plenty of frontline workers. So Lyft is a great example of that, both drivers and kind of corporate employees. So I think that's an area where you're able to touch people across like the entire socioeconomic spectrum. Hopefully a lot of Black and brown employees who are carrying the burden of all of this, young people and low income people. But I do think companies also have deep pockets and can help the rest of the ecosystem. So abortion funds, practical support organizations, these are organizations that have existed forever and kind of hold up the entire infrastructure of abortion care. Because sadly, a lot of government spending in the past, we don't have federal Medicaid that can support this. So people have had to turn to other sources. They provide tons of financial support, practical support now. So driving people places, hotel stays. Sometimes these are folks who are leaving their town for the first time in their lives. So getting on an airplane is unimaginable. There are hosts that accompany patients to other states, really expensive. So I think demonstrating that you're a part of the movement and not necessarily totally recreating it is really important and would go a long way. So donations to those organizations is also very, very important, a great way to impact everyone besides just your employees.
I would super second that. I think I think it was the original founder of NAACP who said something to the effect of with excellent social justice, we don't need social service, something to that effect. And it's like, we as companies are unfortunately in this country now setting cutting edge benefits and policies for Americans far ahead of what state governments are doing to a certain extent. And we're serving as demonstration pilots too. I think it's really notable to look historically at what's happened in California and see when and which companies started providing parental leave, and then how long after that, particularly in Silicon Valley, right, as a role model for the rest of the state, how long after that our state government passed parental leave codified for everyone. So we have a responsibility to set normative frameworks to be unequivocal about where we stand, and to engage in the type of advocacy that helps spread those frameworks so that they're accessible to everyone. I'll say that. And I also will say, I think it's disgusting that we have to. It's really silly how many different benefits are just accessible to people who have the right jobs. And we as a country have to do a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that.
If there's like playbooks or tools or anything that's helpful for kind of smaller companies that don't have all the resources to implement these types of programs is also really helpful. I know that, you know, startups, early stage, late stage are also always eager to help, but may not have full teams of policy folks at their disposal. So I think there's also a really good opportunity for, you know, companies to also work closely together and particularly look at those who are hitting kind of different folks along the socioeconomic spectrum, if that's what you're really interested in. But yeah, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for this to kind of like trickle down.
Yeah. Great. Well, we've got about 7 minutes left. So I'm going to give a final question and then I'll turn it over to each of you for any kind of final comments that you would like to make. Clearly, you have both are working with businesses that are seeking to advance gender equality through healthcare access, et cetera. And I'm wondering about your thoughts and your opinion on how this Supreme Court ruling might impact gender equality and the advancement of women in the workplace overall. Do you have any concerns about that? Do you see any glimmers? You know, I think you have both shown us the glimmers of hope, but do you see any other concerns about what this means for women in the workplace?
I mean, yes.
Sure.
I'm happy to. I mean, you know, again, hopefully we all kind of step up to the plate and do what needs to get done and move as quickly as possible. But if we don't, of course there are, you know, we are talking, as I said, this is forced birth. So we're talking about more people for whatever reason they need or would like an abortion being forced to carry a pregnancy to term that they don't want to or can't or don't feel, you know, prepared to for any number of reasons. We're talking about people dropping out of the workforce. For some people, you know, childcare is extraordinarily expensive in this country. It's another problem. So there will be a lot of people who will have to completely drop out of the workforce. Maternal mortality rates in this country are atrocious, particularly for, you know, Black birthing people. So forcing anyone to go through something that's expensive and potentially harmful depending on their situation will have tremendous impacts on I think equity. And then I would also say it's not just a women's issue, right? So there are plenty of trans people, gender non-binary people who get abortions too, are often left out of the conversation. And this will greatly impact them as well. In the exact same ways, and even just like turning back the clock in terms of how we talk about these issues. So I think we have an opportunity to not let it happen, but if we don't, yes, I think it could have really detrimental effects.
Yeah. And Sarah, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I think the last 3 years have represented the biggest setback we've seen to women's rights since in the last 100 years. The pandemic, if you look at the economic statistics of the impact of the pandemic, more women left the workforce than in any other era in history that we can look back at and see. And it was because of our shoddy infrastructure, our shoddy benefits infrastructure, our failure to pass Build Back Better, which by the way had many different benefits that would have sort of disproportionately helped women in the workplace, women in our families. And as Gaby said, these aren't women's issues per se, they're family issues. I think a lot of our policies have really become more and more unfriendly to families. And you're seeing the effect of that as you look at the labor force now as well, and how few people, how disproportionate the demand for labor is relative to the supply. We are missing out on, as business leaders, we are missing out on tens of millions of incredibly talented biologists, cancer doctors, executive leaders who have had to drop out of the workforce at any stage of their life and experience of a woman, whether it's as a teenager, whether it's because of the glass ceiling, as a mid-aged adult, whether it's because of the exorbitant cost of childcare, which is in many cases much more expensive than mortgages, just for one child. So yeah, I think we're in a lot of trouble. I think we're in the most trouble we've been in a long time. And I think business leaders have a tremendous impact and a tremendous opportunity to lead, especially with a gridlocked Congress, where we're not going to see a lot passed federally. The Supreme Court has become an activist court, and it's up to states, locales, and businesses to really work together, link arms, and try to make a better world for our next generation, if not this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Ladies, this has been such a wonderful conversation with you both today. We have just about 2 minutes left, so I want to give you each an opportunity to share anything that we haven't addressed today. Any final thoughts that you have on this topic? And Sara, we'll start with you.
I don't have too many further thoughts. I'm so grateful that forums like this exist and that coalitions like this exist. There are so many unlikely and likely ways that business leaders can and have advocated together to build a better economy, a better climate, a more just world. And I think we continue to show policymakers through a lot of our advocacy that there are negative externalities for the most well-intentioned things all the time. And unless you're working arm in arm with businesses to really identify problems together, solve problems together, and be creative, I think we're not going to reach the types of solutions that we need. So I'm just so grateful that Kristen, that you've hosted us today. I'm so grateful, Gaby, that your company exists. We need more of them. And I wish that the Supreme Court was as smart, diverse, and badass as the 40 or so people that we've seen asking great questions in the chat and leading important businesses in our area today. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Gaby, any final thoughts?
A lot of just echoing what Sara has said. First of all, I'm just so happy to be here. Grateful for the opportunity. Grateful that you've all taken time out of, I'm sure, your incredibly busy days to talk about this. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is the time. This is the moment. I fundamentally believe that businesses can and should do good. We intentionally created HeyJane as a for-profit company for that reason. It's just core of what we believe and what we do. And so I'm just thrilled to see that there's a group of leaders who agree and are looking to find solutions. I would say this is also the time, don't be afraid to kind of jump in, ask questions, talk to people, learn more about what's available. Medication abortion in and of itself now covers the majority of abortions in the US, but only 1 in 4 people actually even know it's an option. So there is like a tremendous opportunity for education, letting people know what options are available to them, which is now incredibly important because people are just, they can't rely on kind of what they've always relied on. And we're, very happy to speak to anybody who wants to learn more about it. Very thankful for Lyft. We love you guys. We know you've been vocal about this from the very beginning. A very close friend there also who is just so wonderful in healthcare partnerships. And I know that you're all doing such great work. So thank you so much. And thank you all for having us.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Gaby, Sara. Thank you so much for being here today. To Congresswoman Eshoo, we know she had to leave us a little bit earlier, but a thanks goes out to her as well. And thank you to everyone who joined today's conversation, to putting questions in the chat box, really engaging on this topic. It's incredibly important. Again, we are so grateful that you took the time today. Until next time, please, everyone, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Have a good one.